Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a really deep and necessary look at an industry that most people, well, they hope they never need, the specialized field of trauma and crime scene cleanup.
It's a fascinating area, because it really only emerged as its own trade in the early 1990s.
The early 90s, so what happened before that?
Well, often it was just left to, property owners, sometimes police, or even just janitorial staff.
Wow.
Yeah, the shift really happened when awareness grew about the serious health risks involved. We're talking bloodborne pathogens, of course, but also the deep psychological toll these scenes take.
And I imagine when the industry first started, the methods were all over the place.
To be generous, yes.
Yeah.
It was very inconsistent. It relied on so-called common sense or just, good old elbow grease.
But common sense isn't enough when you're dealing with infectious materials and serious liability.
It is definitely not. And that's why our mission today is to unpack the scientific rigor that replaced all those ad hoc methods.
Okay, so what are we focusing on?
We are focusing entirely on what is really the gold standard for this work. The ANSI IICRC S540 standard for trauma and crime scene cleanup.
Right, the S540. And this isn't some textbook written by one person in a lab, is it?
No, not at all. This is the product of a massive consensus body. You've got industrial hygienists, trainers, regulators, trade specialists, all weighing in.
So for you listening, whether you're in this industry or just curious about this unseen work, the goal here is to understand why this kind of rigorous framework is just, well, absolutely necessary.
And it's also crucial to remember that this standard is a living document.
Meaning it changes.
It's constantly being reviewed and changed based on new science, new pathogen threats, and what actually works in the field. So learning the S540 once just isn't enough. Continuous education is, well, it's mandatory.
Okay, so let's start at the foundation. When does the S540 actually apply? What's the strict definition of the work it covers?
Right. The scope is very, very specific. It governs the procedures, the precautions, everything for the cleanup.
So that includes things like safety, documentation.
Exactly. Safety and health protocols, mandatory documentation, the actual structural remediation, and waste disposal.
And there's one huge prerequisite, right?
The single most important one. The standard just assumes the scene has been formally released by law enforcement. If that police tape is up, the cleaning crew waits, period.
That makes perfect sense. You can't compromise an investigation. What about limitations, though? What kind of scene is too complex for just the S540?
The standard is really clear on its exclusions. It explicitly does not provide the protocols for when other significant hazardous materials are present.
And that's a long list, I take it.
It is a worrying one. We're talking asbestos, lead, mercury fuels, dry solvents, even radiological residues.
So if a scene involves a trauma victim who was also, say, an amateur chemist, the cleanup suddenly needs more than just the S540.
Exactly. It becomes a multi-standard job, and that also applies to certain high-risk biological threats.
Beyond just bloodborne pathogens.
Yes. The S540 covers things like HIV and hepatitis B, but if a scene involves, say, a BSL-3 or BSL-4 pathogen, those are the ones that are easily transmitted and life-threatening. That's outside the scope.
And you'd need a totally different team for that.
Completely different specialized procedures. It's a huge liability issue if you don't know when to call in another expert.
Let's talk about that liability, because the language in the S540 is everything. We're talking about words like shall, should, and recommend.
This terminology is the spine of the entire document. It's where the standard of care is truly defined.
Okay, so break it down for us. What does shall mean?
When the standard says shall, that means the action is mandatory. No negotiation. It's either required by law, like an OSHA rule, or it's been agreed upon by the whole consensus body as the absolute minimum.
So if you don't do a shall, you failed to meet the standard.
You failed, precisely.
Yeah.
So if it says you shall wear puncture-resistant gloves when handling sharps and a tech gets a needle stick without them, that's a clear breach.
Got it. Now what about should? It sounds a little softer.
It is, but it's still powerful. A should is still part of the accepted standard of care, but it isn't mandated by a specific regulation. It's the expected professional practice.
So you can deviate from a should, but you better have a good reason.
A very good documented reason. Because if that deviation leads to a problem, you're still considered to have failed the standard of care.
And then there's recommend.
That's just advice, a suggestion. It might be a best practice, but it is not part of the formal standard of care. So you won't be held liable in the same way if you don't follow it.
But the standard does allow for professional judgment, right? If the scene is really unique.
It does, but the burden is high. If you deviate from a shall or a should, you have to exercise professional judgment, verify that decision case by case, and document everything.
So it's a conscious choice, not just carelessness.
Not an oversight, exactly. You have to document the unique circumstances and notify anyone involved.
Okay, moving from the legal side, let's get to the foundation of on-site safety, universal precautions.
That's the rule that changes everything. It's simple. The technician shall assume that all human blood and OPM, that's other potentially infectious material, is infectious.
For everything, HIV, hepatitis.
For everything. You treat every single scene like it contains the most dangerous hazard possible.
And that assumption immediately leads to the first critical step, the hazard assessment.
Yes, and it has to be done before any work begins, and only by qualified professionals, IEPs, or certified technicians.
And they're looking for more than just the biological stuff.
Oh, way beyond that. Yes, they look for blood and tissue, but they're equally focused on physical hazards. Sharp metal, broken glass, chemical risks, two-tier gas residue, mixed household chemicals.
Things you wouldn't even think of.
Right. And they check for unsecured public access, weapons left behind, electrical risks.
And the sources also highlight the psychological hazards.
That's a huge part of it. This work is incredibly stressful. The assessment has to consider the mental and emotional toll on the team. So you put controls in place like rotation schedules or mandatory debriefings.
So once you've identified all these hazards, you have to control them.
Following the formal hierarchy of controls, yes. Ideally, you'd start with elimination or substitution. Get rid of the hazard.
But you can't really do that here. The hazard is the whole reason you're there.
Exactly. So those ideal steps are pretty much impossible, which means you almost immediately default to administrative controls, securing the site, and then the last line of defense, personal protective equipment, PPE.
And when PPE is your main defense, respiratory protection is obviously critical.
It is if any breathing hazard exists. And this brings us to a really key technical detail for you. Assigned protection factors, or APFs.
The APF numbers, I always found these fascinating. They actually quantify how much protection you're getting.
That's exactly what they do. An APF is a measure of how well a respirator works in the real world. You calculate it by dividing the contaminant concentration outside the mask by the concentration inside.
So an APF of 10 means you're only breathing 1/10 of the bad stuff.
Precisely. The higher the number, the better the protection.
Okay, so let's make that real. What does an APF of 10 look like?
That's your standard half-face air purifying respirator. Good for moderate risk, like dust or low-level fumes.
Okay.
Now, jump to a full-face powered air purifying respirator, a PPR. That uses a fan to push filtered air into a sealed mask. That gives you an APF of 1,000.
1,000. So that's 100 times more protection.
100 times. That's a huge leap. And the PPR is really the workhorse of this industry. High protection, but you can still move around pretty easily.
And for the absolute highest risk.
For that, you use a full face pressure demand SCBA self-contained breathing apparatus. Think of a firefighter's air tank. That gives you an APF of 10,000.
10,000. That's basically total isolation from the environment.
Full-scale isolation. And of course, the filters matter too. For biohazards, P100 filters, which are HEPA grade, they're mandatory.
And what if there are chemicals too?
Then you use specialized, color-coded cartridges. Black is for organic vapor, for instance. Magenta is for the P100 filters. It's complex, all just to let someone breathe safely on the job.
Okay, so safety's established. Let's talk about the actual work. The philosophy behind it is simple, right? Removal is key.
That's the most important point. The primary way to remediate is to physically remove and properly dispose of the contamination. Blood, fluids, anything they've soaked into. If you can get it out and throw it away as regulated waste, that's the best solution.
But you can't always remove the structure itself, like a wood subfloor or concrete.
Right. And for those porous or semi-porous materials, when removal isn't practical, it becomes a three-step process.
3 steps.
Thorough cleaning, applying an antimicrobial, and then encapsulation.
Encapsulation, that's the final seal.
Exactly. You're coating it, creating a permanent barrier so nothing can get out, ever. And if a structural piece can't be cleaned or encapsulated properly, the S540 says it shall be removed.
Let's talk about that middle step, the antimicrobial. These are heavily regulated chemicals.
They are. And we need to distinguish between sanitizers, disinfectants, and sterilants. The wrong choice can leave a deadly pathogen behind.
Okay, so what's a sanitizer?
A sanitizer reduces microorganisms to safe levels. But crucially, it doesn't kill all spores.
And a disinfectant.
Stronger. It kills or inactivates pathogens. But here's the key limitation. Disinfectants really only work on hard, non-porous surfaces.
Using a disinfectant on, say, a blood-soaked mattress is basically
It's
useless.
largely ineffective. The chemical can't get deep enough to guarantee a complete kill. The contamination is still inside. That's why, for something like that, you default to disposal.
And then you have the sterilants.
These are the heavy hitters. They destroy all forms of microbial life, including those really tough bacterial spores.
And the rule is you have to follow the label.
You shall apply it according to the label directions. Deviating from the label is illegal, and it's ineffective.
This brings us to the decision-making for all the items in a room, the contents. The S540 has a whole matrix for this.
It does. And porosity, how absorbent a material is, that's the deciding factor. We classify things as porous type 1, which is like washable clothes, porous type 2, like upholstery, semi-porous, and non-porous.
Give us an example of how that works.
Okay, take 2 items. First, an irreplaceable family heirloom, a metal sculpture. That's non-porous. If it's contaminated, you restore it. The blood is just on the surface, so you can clean it reliably.
Makes sense.
Now, take a priceless, one-of-a-kind upholstered chair. That's porous type 2. If it's saturated with blood, the matrix shifts immediately to preserve or dispose.
Because you can never truly get it clean.
You can't. It's technically impossible to verify it's sanitary because the fluids have penetrated so deeply.
So after all that cleaning is done, you have to verify it worked. And you can't just trust your eyes.
No, because bioresidue can be invisible. So you have a post-remediation evaluation by the technician, and then maybe a formal verification by an independent professional if the client requires it.
And to find that invisible contamination, you use detection aids.
Right, like a black light, ultraviolet light. A lot of body fluids will fluoresce or glow under it. It's a great screening tool.
But it's not foolproof.
Not at all. It's loaded with false positives. Common detergents, things with optical brighteners, they'll glow too.
So how do you tell the difference?
You need a corroborating test, like hydrogen peroxide. Peroxide foams when it hits the catalase enzyme in fresh blood.
But that has limitations too, right?
Huge limitations. Old blood often won't foam. That's a false negative. And rust, or even some plant matter, can cause foaming a false positive. You never rely on just one test.
Which is why the industry is moving more towards ATP detection.
Yes, adenosine triphosphate, ATP. It's the energy molecule in all organic matter. The test is fast, under 5 minutes, and it gives you an objective number for how much organic residue is on a surface.
So a high number means it's still dirty, a low number means it's clean.
It's that line in the sand that confirms cleanliness. But even ATP testing has a weakness.
What's that?
Certain cleaning chemicals, like chlorine bleach, can interfere with the test chemistry and give you a falsely low reading. So technicians had to be highly trained to rinse and neutralize surfaces correctly before testing, or the results are just meaningless.
So the S540 sets this incredibly high bar, but the real world gets messy. Let's talk about what the standard calls conflicts.
Right. A conflict is a major issue. It's when there's a disagreement, maybe the property owner insists on coming in before the police release the scene.
Or they want you to just throw the bio-waste in a dumpster to save money.
A classic conflict. And the standard is unequivocal about this. If a conflict prevents you from complying with a shall or should, you are expected to decline the project.
Or stop work.
Or stop work immediately until it's resolved. You cannot sacrifice safety or the law for a customer. The consequences are catastrophic.
And we have a horrifying real-world case study of that, Georgia Act 566.
The state of Georgia had to step in because the abuses were just so severe. This law, passed in 2020, was the nation's first crime and trauma cleanup law.
And it was a direct response to predatory companies.
Companies that were victimizing families already in the middle of a tragedy.
What were some of the worst things they were doing?
Oh, there were reports of completely untrained companies leaving visible blood and tissue behind. Others would tell families everything in the house was contaminated, convince them to empty it all out, and then sell the contents at a yard sale.
That's horrible.
Price gouging, putting liens on homes. But the most shocking abuse was about waste disposal.
What happened?
The reports detail these unlicensed companies just tossing regulated medical waste, including human remains, into local landfills or dumpsters behind shopping centers.
Oh my God.
Yeah, creating entirely new public health hazards and, sickeningly, sparking new investigations when the remains were discovered.
So how does the law protect people now?
It creates accountability. Companies have to be registered, background checked, and prove they have insurance and a surety bond. And critically, insurance companies can refuse to pay a claim if the company doesn't have a valid Georgia Trauma Services registry number.
So it cuts off the money for the bad actors.
It does. And it also protects employees. It's now illegal for an employer, like a store manager, to force an employee to clean a trauma scene.
That's a huge protection.
It is. It comes with fines up to $5,000 per incident. It recognizes this as specialized work.
Which brings us back full circle to medical waste disposal, which is governed by this staggering number of regulations.
It's entirely governed by law, DOT, EPA, OSHA. All regulated waste, whether it's liquid blood or contaminated sharps, shall be packaged in color-coded biohazard bags and approved containers.
You can't just put it in a trash bag.
No. Sharps need their own puncture-resistant containers. The whole process involves detailed tracking, cradle-to-grave accountability. It's a huge logistics challenge.
We've really gone from the early Wild West days of this industry to a highly regulated, science-driven profession. It's focused on environmental, physical, and psychological health.
And the main takeaway is that professional judgment is absolutely key, but it has to operate within that strict framework of standards and legal compliance. And because the science evolves, learning has to be an ongoing, mandatory duty.
We've discussed the incredible amount of documentation required. I mean, equipment logs, chemical data sheets, biohazard manifests, timesheets. It's exhaustive. But consider this final thought for you. Why is this industry often advised to maintain all of that project documentation for the longest applicable statute of limitations in that jurisdiction? Sometimes they're even told to keep it indefinitely. What hidden liability are they protecting themselves against years or even decades after the visible contamination is gone? And why does that long-term risk mandate such relentless record retention? Think about that long tail of consequence.